Ah, again, morning. Um, it's almost September. That's a month. Okay. One of the problems I have is that, like, when I think of stories, all stories are connected, and I keep saying it. And I do have a story I want to tell you, and then my mind just gets these other stories, and that's not attention deficit disorder. That's how my brain works. I am able to sit down and concentrate on something for an unbelievable amount of time. In which case, I'm usually, like if I'm drawing, I can draw the fender of a car for a week. And that's when my mind doesn't grind away at stuff. At any rate, I'm sitting down and I have this hat I wanted to wear today. And I noticed that, and I really want to get this story, but I noticed something that, turning on the light here, that it's made by Cetra Associates by Fremar, made in Italy. And then there's a sign that says pure wool with a sheep. And that is, you see that? A moth. A moth ate a hole, 2 holes in my hat. I've always been bothered by the fact that there's like an insect that eats my clothes. But there it is. It's an Italian hat. I kind of thought it was Irish, but it's not. So here we go. I had a studio in the 80s in Brooklyn on the Gowanus Canal, another story, you won't believe that I'm not going to tell it. It had been originally built as a police stables and precinct at the turn of the last century. That would be the 20th. And then it was converted from a police precinct and stables to an ASPCA shelter, which makes sense. However, in the late 70s, it was yet again converted into an organ factory. One of the last organ factories and organ repair place, like general, like church organs. Like, wow, okay. And my studio was right above the organ factory, and the 40-foot pipes were right under my concrete poured floor. So when I'd be painting and you could hear Bach, because the fellow who ran the shop loved playing Bach. And if you've ever heard Bach on a church organ, it's an amazing experience. But you've never heard Bach on a church organ when you're standing on the floor above it. I happen to enjoy it. But oddly enough, several things happened, and I'll get back to the church problem, but it was an ASPCA shelter, and when I moved in, it was only a few years had become a church. A church. That's ironic. No, it became a organ factory. People in Brooklyn still thought it was an ASPCA shelter, and so they would abandon animals there. There was a dog run on the side. They would drop dogs in there, or ducks, or turtles. One night, now this was an extremely dangerous neighborhood. It still is, but at the time it was an extremely dangerous neighborhood. And I won't explain that. But one night I was ambling home, having had a bit to drink, and I got to the front door, and there was a very angry German Shepherd leashed to the front door. And I couldn't get near the door because he would lunge and growl. So I sat down and just started talking to him, and slowly got closer. And eventually he was leaning against me, and he wasn't talking, but I kept talking to him. And then the next day we got him off to the ASPCA shelter. So at any rate, early in the mornings when I would get up, and the front of the studio was just huge windows, and the light would be coming in, and I would make killer coffee in a giant mug with a samurai warrior on it. It had a samurai warrior with his sword, and I would raise that mug and just dare myself to collapse. And I would start painting, and at the time I listened to a lot of Philip Glass because I happen to like Philip Glass. And if you're not familiar, he's the guy who does infinitely recursive repeating scales that mount in emotional changes. So it's like, and it goes on and on and on and on. I happen to like it. So one day, the owner of the organ factory came upstairs and he yells, he says, "How can you listen to that shit?" And I was like, look, I enjoy Bach, and I enjoy Bach when you're playing and I'm standing on top of your pipes. If you don't enjoy Philip Glass, fine, but you can't hear it down there. You're just coming up to bitch about Philip Glass. And he laughed and I laughed because we got along very well. So one day, years later, I had moved that studio. I had moved my studio back to the Lower East Side. I had had a studio on the Lower East Side, and I moved back to the Lower East Side about 2 blocks from where I had been, which is kind of funny too. One day I was walking up 2nd Avenue, and Philip Glass was standing on the corner. And I thought, I've always wanted to tell him how much I've enjoyed his music. And so I went over, and if you don't know Philip Glass, he's not the cheeriest fellow in the world. And I came over and I said, "Philip Glass?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "My name is Jeffrey, and I've listened to your music for years. And I'm a painter, and back in the early 80s, I was listening to Kayana Scotzi almost every day." He said, "Well, that's very nice. Where is your?" I said, "Well, I'm on my way to my studio, and I see you, and I just wanted to tell you." And then I thought, I'm going to tell him what the owner of the organ factory said about his work. And then I thought, wait a minute, this is almost the last organ factory in the United States, and it's impossible that Philip does not know this guy, because this guy's like really well known, and he's like the guy with organs, like churches and cathedrals. He's the guy. And I thought, I can't tell Philip what this guy said about his music. And so I censored myself. And it's very rare for me to censor myself. So somehow I respected Philip Glass. That's it.